One of the big differences between being a die-hard superhero fan and a casual fan is that when you're a die-hard fan, through one way or another, you're usually hearing all of the various steps that a movie is going through as it goes through those steps. And sometimes you'll hear that such and such of a movie is going to come out in 5 years, but then it never does. This happens to me just often enough that I thought I would do a top 5 video on superhero movies that never were, that should have been made. Some of these are projects that were just a little before my time, but I heard about them anyway and thought they were interesting, and some of them I remember hearing that they would be made at the time that the rumors were circulating, and for various reasons they were never made. This list goes in order of what I would be least interested in seeing to what I would have been most interested in seeing. And even though I said this was a top 5 video, before I get to the actual top 5, I have an honorary mention here. Honorary mention goes to Superman Flyby. This movie was in the early 2000s. It would have been directed by J.J. Abrams, and in all honesty, this sounded like a really interesting Superman movie, but the reason that it is not in the actual top 5 here is because there were some very controversial things in this story idea that a lot of people really hated, and if this had been made into a movie, let me put it this way. All the controversy surrounding the Man of Steel and Superman killing General Zod, that would have looked like nothing compared to the controversy that Superman Flyby would have generated if it had actually been made into a movie. Number one, the planet Krypton still exists. It has not been exploded. It is still a planet that exists, and the reason that Superman is sent to planet Earth is because of a civil war that's been raging on Krypton. And then some character sort of similar to General Zod, he comes to Earth and he wants to kill Kal-El because he's from the opposing side. And then at the end of the movie, after that Kryptonian has been defeated, you find out that Lex Luthor is also a Kryptonian. That would have really made people angry. That and the fact that Krypton is still around, people kind of need those elements to be consistent. Now personally, I would not mind if this story happened in some other way. If you did it as an Elseworlds graphic novel, I would love to see that happen. I just don't think that after such a long period of not seeing Superman on the big screen, that your opening salvo should be something so radically different from what people accept as being official. Now let me go ahead and say that I don't mind some deviation from the source material. Some of my favorite parts of the Smallville television series were the times when it did new stuff, like the mythology surrounding the caves, or the idea that Jor-El was a villain, but I feel like Flyby would have taken things way too far. And number 5, George Miller's Justice League movie. This one is so incredibly low on the list because everything that I've heard about this movie makes me think that if it had actually been made, I probably would have been very skeptical about it. A lot of the casting around this movie, I'm very not sure that it would have worked. Armie Hammer as Batman, that's interesting, but I don't know if he's actually Batman material. Adam Brody as the Flash, I don't really know a lot about his acting ability, but I've only ever seen him in one episode of a sitcom, so again, I'm not really sure if he could have pulled off the Flash. A lot of what I've heard about this movie makes me think the casting would not have excited me that much if it had actually been made. The reason that it is on this list, though, is because I would have loved to have seen a Justice League movie before the Avengers. I have never made any secret that I am not really a huge fan of the Marvel Studios movies at all, and I think it's kind of a crime that the Avengers got made before the Justice League. Admittedly, I am biased. I like the Justice League a lot more than I like the Avengers, so it makes sense that I would think this. But I also think it would have been really interesting to see a superhero team movie that does not need 5 movies to set up its characters. I think we live in a day and age where we don't actually need an origin movie for Batman or Superman or Green Lantern or Wonder Woman. We can just do a team movie, and then if people are interested in seeing a Wonder Woman film or a Green Lantern film, then we can do that. I think this would have been a very interesting movie that would have fundamentally changed the way that superhero movies are done today. If this movie had happened, I don't really think that we would have had 5 setup movies for the Avengers movie. We probably would have just jumped into an Avengers movie, and then we would have had solo movies. I think that would have been a very interesting world to live in, but the reason that this one is so low on my list is because I don't really think any of the casting for this movie was spectacular or anything like that. Number 4 is a Batman Year One adaptation by Joel Schumacher. Now you may be surprised, I actually don't hate Joel Schumacher. I don't think that a lot of the things that people hate about his Batman movies are really his fault. A lot of what went down in Batman and Robin was actually the fault of the studio. They wanted it to be even more child-friendly than it was before. They were kind of rushing him on this movie. He didn't have a whole lot of time to make the movie. I think a lot of the problems that people have with Batman and Robin really shouldn't be laid at Joel Schumacher's feet. And he has talked before about how if he had been given free rein to do whatever kind of Batman movie he wanted, he would have done something considerably darker. At one point, he talked about doing a sequel to Batman and Robin called Batman Triumphant that would have had Man-Bat and Scarecrow and Harley Quinn and a return of the Jack Nicholson Joker. I don't really think that would have been a good movie. But he's also talked before about how he wanted to do a prequel to the Tim Burton movies featuring Kurt Russell as Jim Gordon. I think this would have been very interesting. Now, having said that, I just don't think that Joel Schumacher would have been allowed to make the movie that he wanted to make. After 2 attempts to make a Batman movie that he wanted to make, it seems to me that the studio basically was entirely in control of that franchise. And even if he had been given a 3rd or 4th try to make a Batman movie that he wanted to make, I still think that the studios would have interfered and it would have been a movie that nobody really would have wanted to have seen. I should also mention this is not to be confused with the Batman Year One project that Darren Aronofsky wanted to do. That would have been an entirely different movie where Bruce Wayne doesn't really have a fortune, where he's just kind of this psychotic teenage guy who goes around beating up criminals, and Alfred is not his butler, but he's a mechanic named Al. This would have been an entirely different movie, as far as I know, not in any way related to the Darren Aronofsky Year One project that he wanted to do. And number 3 on this list is an animated movie called Batman Asylum. Stephen Gordon, an animator, and producer Boyd Kirkland were going to be doing this, and basically this was right around the time that Sub-Zero came out. And what's really interesting about this movie is that they were going to change the character designs a little bit. If you look at some of these pictures, they don't exactly look like the DC Animated Universe characters, and I think that would have been kind of a prologue to the DC Direct movies that we have now. Starting with Superman Doomsday, the people who were involved with the DC Animated Universe, they wanted to make movies that weren't really connected to the DC Animated Universe. So with each movie, they would use kind of a different art style. And I think it would have been very interesting to see that much earlier than what we actually did get to see it. And also, I think this would have been a very interesting story. We don't really know a whole lot about it. Basically, Bruce Wayne was going to be engaged to some woman and he was thinking about giving up being Batman. Bane was going to escape from Arkham Asylum and was going to hurt Robin. And at one point, the Joker was going to be experimented on by Arkham scientists. That's basically all we know. But looking at some of these pictures that I got from the Legions of Gotham website, by the way, if you guys haven't ever seen that website, go check it out because it is really awesome and has a lot of information of anything Batman related that you might want to see. Looking at that website, I think that this would have been a really interesting movie. Sadly, it came down to a point where they could either make this movie or Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. And although I do have some problems with Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, I do think that it's good that we got that movie over this one. I'm not sure if this would have been quite the movie that Batman Beyond Return of the Joker ended up being. And also, this one isn't any higher on my list because, frankly, we have a lot of Batman movies. So if one movie isn't made, I'm not going to cry about that. I do think this would have been an interesting movie, but we already have something like 20 Batman movies, live action and animated, so I don't think that it's such a loss that we did not get this movie, even though I do think it would have been interesting to see. Number 2, Green Arrow Supermax. This would have been directed by David Goyer, and everything that I have heard about this movie sounds amazing. Some of my biggest problems with superhero movies today is that they just feel so incredibly formulaic. When you hear about a superhero movie that's coming on in theaters, usually I'm just kind of ho-hum about it because it seems like all of the other hundreds of superhero movies that we've had ever since the early 2000s. This movie would have been incredibly different, and I would have been stoked to see it even before I was a Green Arrow fan. Basically, the premise of this is that Green Arrow gets arrested for a crime that he didn't commit, at least I think that's what's going on, and then he gets put into a prison with a whole bunch of superhumans who basically want him dead, and then he convinces them, don't kill me and I will help you escape. And then the rest of the movie is basically a prison break movie just with superhero characters. This would have been amazing, and it would have been such a deviation from the formula that we constantly see in superhero movies today that I think this would have been another movie that really would have changed the landscape of superhero movies. If this had been made, I think it would have convinced people, oh, we don't have to stick to the same formula that we are always using with superhero movies. Maybe we're still going to see that day come someday. It looks like Guardians of the Galaxy is really departing very far from that formula, so we'll just have to see if that day still comes, but personally, I would still love to see Green Arrow Supermax happen. I know some people have said, why don't they just adapt that script into the Green Arrow TV show? I would love to see that happen. Maybe for 3 or 4 episodes, I would love to see Ollie be in prison, but it would probably have to be a long time from now before they could do that if they wanted to kind of keep the integrity of the Arrow TV show. And number 1 on this list, speaking of David Goyer, the number 1 superhero movie that was not made that I think should have been made, Magneto Origins. I actually read the screenplay for this movie, or if I didn't actually read the real screenplay, then I read a really amazing fake script that somebody needs to take to Hollywood and say, hey, hire me for something. Regardless, I read a script for this movie that was really good. And let me just say, just reading the script, if that movie had been made, it would have been hands down the best X-Men movie ever made. Right now, my favorite X-Men movie of all time is X-Men First Class, but that movie has some pretty significant problems for me that I find it's really hard for me to get over those problems. Magneto Origins would have skipped a lot of the problems that X-Men First Class had. In fact, a lot of people, not necessarily me, a lot of people have some huge problems with X-Men First Class in that it kind of has a lot of contradictions to the previous movies. Magneto Origins would have skipped a lot of that also. So I think that the general people who are really just in this to see, oh look, there's a contradiction, oh look, that doesn't make sense, I think even those people would have been okay with Magneto Origins. There was one moment where Magneto and Charles Xavier rescue some people from something that's kind of sort of like the Weapon X project, but it's not called that, and they rescue Mystique and Sabretooth. I don't really think that would have worked since this movie was supposed to come out after the Wolverine Origins movie, so we would have already had a backstory for Sabretooth, so I don't think that this would have necessarily worked with that. But then again, since the Wolverine Origins movie completely spits in the face of the previous 3 movies, I'm kind of okay with this movie, if it had been made, just completely spitting in the face of Wolverine Origins. Screenwriter Sheldon Turner said that this would have been X-Men meets The Pianist, and I think after reading that script, yeah, that's an apt description. I think this would have been a really amazing story. It would have, in my opinion, been a much more believable origin for why Magneto kind of is the way he is in the present day. In First Class, much as I love that movie, he's kind of sort of already on the path to villainy at the very beginning of the movie. This movie would have explored why he becomes a villain and kind of how he tries to explore other options, and he sees that those options just are not viable for him. I really think that it's a crime that this movie did not get made. I almost wish that Wolverine Origins had been more successful just so that this movie could have been made, because as I understand it, the only reason that it was not made was because Wolverine Origins was not as successful as they wanted it to be. And those are my top 5 superhero movies that I wish had been made. What do you guys think of this list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are there some other superhero movies that you wish had been made and they were not made for various reasons? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with a different kind of video. So, until then, I will see you guys later. Have a great day.